Podcasters Roundtable round, I don't know. I think it's 1:30. That's how thrown together this is. Literal last minute. So hopefully you're able to join us live, but most of you are listening to the podcast version, not live on youtube.com/podcasters roundtable. But yeah, I didn't shave, clearly didn't brush my hair, just threw a hat on, and I found the only two nerds with nothing else to do. So it's just me, co-host Dave Jackson, and recurring guest now. I think he's angling for a t-shirt, Dave. But Dave Jackson, welcome.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, ready to celebrate what is the holiday coming up? Memorial Day weekend. It's the official kickoff of summer podcasting.
Summer podcast. Is that a thing? Like, is there something different happen on your show in the summer?
Yeah, you have to turn off the air conditioning.
less clothing podcasting. But I thought that's redundant. Wow. Isn't that just redundant? Like, who wears clothes to podcast? Oh, we do because we're on camera, but
just have a shirt on.
Just shirts. We're shirts and skins. This is terrible.
With your mics out.
Right. Oh boy, that would be Evo. Welcome.
Hey, thanks very much. Evo Terra with you. Let's see. Yeah, multiple. How many times? Like third time I think I've been on the program.
Yeah, but third time like within a short period of time. So
exactly. Yeah, because I've been away for a while. So yeah, Evo Terra, longtime podcaster. Check out Podcast Pontifications. It's better than Dave's show.
It's better than Dave's show. Well,
and the thing is that, but you don't know which show I'm talking about because Dave Jackson has 19 different podcasts.
The question is, and this leads us into the question: is it better when we search for podcasts about podcasting? That's what we're going to talk about. This is kind of an open-ended question because it is extremely thrown together. I have one question for the group, and the way this turns out lately, one question's all we need. And 45 minutes to 2.7 hours later, we're still here. But I want to know, and I'll try not to lead this. I just want to know, is your podcast searchable? So when I say that, I actually want to know what you think. So in the chat, type it now. If you're in the chat, podcastersroundtable.com/live. That's where you can see the chat, or YouTube. We'll see it either way. When I say, is your podcast searchable, what do you think? Because I think this might be changing. I'd let it too much already. But what do you think immediately, Dave, when I ask you, is your podcast searchable?
My immediate thing I pop to is Apple.
Yeah, right.
Because that's just the way we've been trained forever.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean?
Well, I think in America, at least, there are people that just, podcasting equals Apple, and we kind of forget there are Androids and.
So you're talking. I know it's Apple Podcast, but you're referring to Podcatcher.
Yes,
iTunes or Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, and I think that's probably also due to my job because I have a lot of people that freak out because they can't find their show in Apple Podcasts because there's 700,000 of them and a lot of trash, and it's cluttering up the place.
So until recently, it's probably still the same. I don't imagine you've changed much. What does making your podcast searchable in relation to what that means to you? What does that mean you do? Do you do anything with the thought of being searchable?
Because see, here's the fun thing. Now with Apple kind of smacking people to put in keywords, you have to put the title of your show. So if your title of your show, one of my shows is called the Podcast Rodeo Show. And if you type in Podcast Rodeo Show, just put in Podcast Rodeo Show into search and hit search in Apple Podcast, it does not show up. But if you put in Dave Jackson, it'll show I think Evo said 19 shows. And one of them is the Podcast Rodeo Show. So and there's really not much more I can do maybe legally without getting smacked by Apple. I mean, I have the name in there. I have my author tag, and the rest of my titles are about other shows that I'm reviewing. So it's one of those where you're like, how do I, do that? And that's why I always just tell people, my recommendation to people is make sure you have subscribe buttons on your website. Because if somebody says, oh, I'd like to hear that show, I don't want to say, find me in Apple Podcasts, because you're not, unless if I have to tell somebody how to search, I don't want to send people there. I want to go, oh yeah, just search for Dave Jackson, scroll to the right. It's the fifth one on the right. I want to tell them to go to mywebsite.com and then click on the subscribe button.
Wait, what was the core reason you're not showing up for your own show?
Oh, the core reason is Apple search sucks.
And so the audio people didn't get that because of my internet took a cutout. But I think you said it sucks.
Yes, Apple search is not great. I'll be polite. It's not very good. And I don't know if it's not very good or it just wasn't.
Are you sure you're not doing
designed-
something wrong?
I mean, the title of my show is Podcast Rodeo Show.
Can you? What if you made an episode? Well, no. What if you made an episode just in the title of your show? Trying to think
I
of a way
guess
to
I
hack
could
it.
put, the title of my episode in the title of, I could do, but that drives me nuts. I mean, that's one of my pet peeves, but if it might make me be found more, I guess I could put, like, I think the last one I just reviewed was a show called, I forget what it was, whatever the name was, Podcast Rodeo Show. But
Evo, what
Yeah.
would you do? You help people with podcasts all the time, big level. What would you do with Dave's issue here? I mean, what would you tell him? I mean, as far as Apple goes, because
well, I mean, we are limited. Dave's right. We're limited with what Apple wants us to do, and Dave nailed it. Search sucks on Apple Podcast, iTunes, whatever you want to call it. It always has. I'm not so stupid to say that it always will. I think they will eventually get their stuff together, but it doesn't matter. I was helping someone the other day, said, hey, their show had the word Maine, as in this state, in the title, and they were unable to get it to show up. Well, that's not true. They would launch Apple Podcasts on their phone, and they just typed in Maine by itself. Just typed in Maine. They said, hey, my show's not showing up. So I went and looked. There are 24 podcasts with the word Maine in the title that show up. You know how many podcasts Apple Podcast will show for any given keyword? 24. It's a maximum number it's going to do. So if you're the 25th show, or you're the one of 100 shows that has the word Maine in the title, why would you expect it to show up? And I don't think Apple cares too much about fixing search that way, because they're not a search company. Now, Google, on the other hand, is a search company.
And that would be a great transition. I don't want to go there yet, but
just to chime in, let me add a little more fuel to the fire. I was sitting here testing it because, Evo's client just typed in one word. I typed in the word rodeo, came right up. Put in podcast rodeo, because when I put in the word podcast, I'm now ranked against all the other shows that have the word podcast in it.
But you do great for rodeo, which
Yeah.
nobody wants your show when they're searching just rodeo.
You should totally change your topic and make it all about the podcast rodeo show. Come on, make it all about rodeos and podcasting.
Dude, that is a niche you could probably destroy. Not because you're steeped in rodeo knowledge, but I bet there's probably some legit rodeo podcasts.
Oh, there are. Yeah, I'm looking at them.
I'm looking at them. Wait, where do you come up for rodeo? Just rodeo.
Just rodeo. I'm doing this in Apple iTunes, the desktop.
Yeah, sure. They're trying to get those closer and closer all the time.
And I 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm 14.
Okay, so not amazing. Because I was like, hey, that's actually, that's kind of a dream. Like, you want to be a one-word celebrity. I mean, you want to be a one-word podcast. You're like, search rodeo.
I'm right next to typewriter rodeo. I don't know what that means.
And again, probably nothing to do with the actual rodeo.
Proving again that Apple search is not great.
So here's the thing, because Evo said that Apple is iTunes. Apple doesn't care because iTunes or Apple's not a search. But here's something I think a lot of us say. I've certainly said this plenty of times when I'm talking to people about having a podcast, saying that if you don't have a podcast, you're not in a place where people are searching for things. You're not in one of the biggest search engines. People are inside iTunes looking for content. Are people searching? Is this a way people find podcasts? I don't search for new shows I might in an app. I don't know. Do I ever go to an app to search for a podcast, which kind of makes sense if you want a new podcast, but I'm more apt to look online. I don't know. What do you think, Evo? Are these places, are people searching for new stuff on these places?
Sure, but it's a very small number.
Yeah.
It is by far not the number one way people discover shows. People discover shows in podcast apps all the time, just not through the search.
How they do it? Because I know there's not a lot of room. There's not a lot of discovery inside an app.
Yeah, there's not a lot of discovery inside of the app. It's the same way that a lot of people discover content on places like Netflix, for example. And that is, what are you shown when you launch the app? That is what people have been have learned to do, is when I launch this thing, it will provide for me a list, a relatively large list.
What apps do that? Because I use Pocket Cast and I see my subscriptions when I launch my app. I'm never introduced to other podcasts in Pocket Cast.
There's not a browse or a home or anything
There
like
is,
that.
but I have to go to it. So I don't, you know what I mean? It's not.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, so let's also, I would break this out into people who are brand new.
Okay. All right.
And also people who are looking for additional content.
Okay.
But regardless, whether you're brand new or looking for content, at some point in time, a person who says, okay, I've consumed the 3 or 4 podcasts or 7 podcasts, since that's the average, I want something new. They typically don't go search. They go home. So they see what other people are listening to, what's being recommended, what's in the categories, what's in they're looking for more of shows about something, and search in app isn't what they turn to.
You said something that's sort of a little pet peeve of mine and has to do with the Edison research. And you said the average is 7, which is not true. They've stated that statistic wrong every year. I wish they'd just put a little thing, because you're talking about the stat that says people listen on average to 7 podcasts.
Right.
It's 7 podcast episodes. Not podcast as in each one is a show, right? So on average, people listen to 7 podcast episodes. I think a week.
Oh, interesting.
It's 3 of one show and 4 of another.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I brought it up to Tom a long time ago. And I asked, I said, I don't understand what this means. And does it mean people are listening to that? That seemed like, I was like, cool. And it doesn't, and they just refuse to clear it up. I don't understand that.
Yeah, they should fix that. So thanks for correcting me on that.
Yeah.
But the other factor is, people who subscribe to podcasts, like the 3 of us here in the room together, it's not the most, that is not the assumed behavior any longer. I talk to regular people, not podcasters, who talk about the podcast they listen to, and I say, which one are you subscribed to? And I oftentimes get I'm sorry, what? What do you mean subscribe to a show? No, I just go and I find things that I'm interested in, and somebody tells me about it. I go find that show and I listen for a couple of episodes. And
that's it. Are they cherry picking an episode that they were recommended, not necessarily a podcast they're recommended?
Yeah.
And so they're not subscribing. Where are they going to? The web? Or website?
The web. Some of them actually use apps. I hear a lot about this from Spotify users who will hear about something specific, and sometimes they will go to the podcast inside of Spotify, for example, and then they'll scroll through the titles until they find something that sounds interesting and click, and that's the one they begin streaming to, which is very alien.
I recently, just the other day on my TV, I pulled it up, the podcast app, because my daughter, I let her sleep in the studio here, the office.
Yeah.
And I was like, she wants to watch TV. I'm like, no, how about a podcast? She said, great. I said, you close your eyes and listen to a podcast. So I went, I did this thing that was really weird. I went to the podcast app. I was like, does this exist? The podcast app was there on the Apple TV. And I was like, let's just look at kids. And I just started scrolling, right? And a lot of the stuff that was in there, I was like, that's probably not a kid's podcast. It didn't even make sense. I found something, but it was definitely not normal behavior. But I did go for that sort of discovery. I was like, show it to me, right? Bring me your suggestions. And I don't even know what I was looking for. I think I probably landed on the Gimlet show. So there's probably a reason for that. I don't know what it was. You said something else that made me think of something. What was it? I don't know, Dave. What do you?
I've got. Doggone! I'm looking at a survey from Jacobs Media. They interviewed radio listening people, and we were talking about how many people use apps. 11%. I can't find the slide. I just had it. 11% find podcasts by searching the app, and then the top 2. Yeah, here we go. Word of mouth. The first one, word of mouth, was 40%. The second one, online word of mouth. Well, I still count that word of mouth. One is offline. So the top 2 account for 78% of how people find podcasts. And next to the bottom, browsing in another podcast app is 11%. So that's Tech Survey 2019 from Jacobs Media. I wish I had this is in my Evernote. Unfortunately, I can't find the website.
Evo, you said that a lot of times you hear that people are going to Spotify to sort of just get that one episode they heard about.
Yep.
Does Spotify do you push people towards subscription? Do we need help? Do we need help getting people to subscribe? Do you think that's a necessary behavior we want to see?
Well, what's in it for Spotify? If
People keep coming back to the app, I would say.
if that would make people happy and people would actually utilize the app more so that Spotify gets more minutes used with the app as part one.
Notifications.
And part two, less time listening to content they have to pay for, which is a big number for them. So if subscriptions helps people do that, then I think they'll absolutely go that angle. But it doesn't look like they have. Have you seen the new redesign of what the Spotify app looks like?
No.
So 3 tabs when you're in the podcast section. The very first tab that you get is episodes, not shows.
That's like page 1 of Google. Like, you're not going at tab 2 and 3.
Right, exactly. Right. So that's the same thing, right? But in Apple Podcasts, as we know, when you search in Apple Podcasts, the first thing that lists these are the podcasts that you want, and then episodes come second. Spotify's flipping the script on that.
Right. I mean, more relevant.
It's more relevant. It's individual episodes. Spotify is not a place you go to listen to albums.
Yeah.
Spotify is a place you go to listen to individual songs. And
it's less friction to get you from searching to listening.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's what they wanted. They want to make a 2-click process as opposed to multi-click process. Spotify cares nothing about the way the 3 of us, and likely most of our listeners, consume podcasts. They're not going after the 20-ish% of people who are hardcore podcast listeners.
But it just makes total sense, because I actually love this. This is maybe the first time I've heard of this sort of music model applied to podcasts, where I'm like, hey, that's different, and I like it, because it is. Who cares like what the podcast is? The point is, you get an episode that's relevant to you.
Right.
You're gonna subscribe. You're a lot likely, if you love it, to go to the show as a whole, as an umbrella piece. Yeah, makes so much more sense. Right. I love that.
Yeah, wow. They are playing to the 70-ish% of the people who don't listen on the regular, who are looking for individual bits of information, not necessarily wanting to sign up and have everything that somebody sends every single week. It's a different person. It's a different potential listener.
This is a perfect segue into the topic I actually started with: is your podcast searchable? And I asked this because Google has started surfacing podcasts in search before. Within the last year, this has been in Google search on Android and on a device, and now it's just in Google results, which is fantastic. It's something I've been talking about for a long time. I want my paycheck, Google, and this is also, in theory, I don't know if this is going to work, because in theory, this is surfacing content that's in a podcast for people who are not searching for a podcast. They're searching for answers, right? I don't know the last time I've had any temptation to Google something and the answer was under a play button, and I was like, yep, let me dig through that 45 minutes to get the answer I wanted. So I'm like, is this even going to work? But whatever. What do you guys think? I think it's good to have, but if it doesn't produce real results, why would it stay around, right?
Well, that goes back to your question of what do you mean by real results? And
for Google, it means clicks, right?
Well, does it mean clicks? If you look at what Google has been doing over the last, I'll just say 10 years, Google has really changed the way they handle knowledge searches. So it used to be, if you asked Google a question like, who are the members of the Beatles?
What is yacht rock?
That's probably not going to get the results I was thinking of.
Inside joke.
That is likely to, maybe that's the next one coming. But it used to be 10 years ago, if you searched for who were the 4 members of the Beatles, Google would provide you 54,000 results of web pages that talked about the members of the Beatles. Then they started surfacing videos. Here's some videos that talk about the formation of the Beatles. All sorts of links to web pages you could get to that would talk about the Beatles.
I want to derail you for 1 second. They did surface videos. Is that because they were building YouTube? Why did they Did they go away from that? Because that was huge. It was always a video at the top. Or
Well, they still surface videos quite a lot.
Okay.
But,
All right.
you know, but what I'm going in there, so I'm just curious what happens when we do it right now. So who were the 4 members of, not the Rat Pack, of the Beatles? Let's see what happens when I type in that. And if I type that in, at the top, I get the answer. Google doesn't send me to a link. It says, here are the Beatles members. John Lennon.
Now, is that in the box, like little box?
It's in a knowledge. It's actually in 2 spots right now. It's in the knowledge box on the right-hand side, and it's also dominating the top third of my page. And I can get to individual links about each one of those people.
2 things I'm seeing now are you've got the main box, whatever site has done the best job of, and Daniel had a good episode on how to get in that box, like be sort of cited as the authority on that. And then there's the toggle down list of little toggle downs that are asking the same question, but sometimes in different ways. Yeah. I'm getting all my answers that way these days.
People ask. Yeah, of course, right? Yeah. So remember, 10 years ago, Google was all about providing relevant web links. Today, Google is about giving you the answers that you need. And that's a big shift. That's a gigantic shift away from what they're trying to do. Is they just try to make people more happy and stay engaged with Google products. So when we talk about what does that mean for podcasting, Google is going to follow that same pattern for us too. If a podcast episode is the best possible relevant results for whatever the search query was, then of course they will surface that. And if it's not the right answer, then they won't, right? And they're gauging all the time. They've got a whole crazy system in place to find out if that's the right or it's the wrong answer. So I think it makes perfect sense that we're seeing podcasts show up the way that they are today, because I think it fits in with Google's larger play.
So when I'm asking, is your podcast searchable? What is Google? You said Google's got a bunch of different ways to figure out if the best answer is coming from your podcast. Yep. What are those? What do we need to be catering to get Google to say this is where it's at? It's in here.
Well, it's a 2-parter, I think. Well, more than 2, but I mean, the primary things is, make sure that we answer your first question. Make sure Google is aware of your content, and make sure that you've done everything according to the way Google wants, so that Google can properly index and grab your content. So that means putting the rel equals alternate link on your page. It likely means
how does someone do? Most people, they're like, what? I don't know.
They don't know how to do this, right? Yeah. They don't know how to do this, right? And that used to be the requirement. Now it's no longer the requirement. Now Google's finding just about everything, but they're not associating it with the right. Google is not associating episodes with the proper, and I'll put that in air quotes for those who are listening and not watching. Google is not associating podcast episodes with the proper domain. Oftentimes, when you see the new episode results from Google, they're associated with someone's Apple podcast listing, not their actual domain. And that's problematic. And that has, I think, a lot to do, not only, it has a lot to do with whether or not your infrastructure, your architecture of your website is properly configured. That is above most people's ken.
Oh, wait a minute. I don't have a website for my podcast. Now what? I'm just kidding. Like, I do.
The good news is your content's still being discovered. People are still getting the episodes. Google thought your episode was the relevant answer. It's easier for them to listen to that episode. So it is serving the purpose that Google thought that it needed. People listen to your show. Do they get exposure to your podcast homepage, your podcast website, your podcast episode page? Not necessarily.
And it sounds like I think I heard a new media show that just because it looks like it's surfacing your Apple result doesn't always mean that when you press the button or play button or whatever, it's coming from Apple. I mean, like sometimes it's Google what's going on? Like
almost always it goes to the Google podcast page, the podcast preview page. It's very disjointed right now.
Why? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's new, right? So these things will change, obviously. But, oh, Dave,
what's interesting? I just typed,
showing up. Yeah.
Well, I just typed in how long should a podcast be? Because I'm like, all right, let me throw in a question here. Daniel, by the way, comes up in a knowledge box, so congrats on that.
See, he knows the trick for that, and you know what? It's buried. So I wonder if you Google the question, Daniel comes up, because I know he revealed that at one point. It was good stuff. I meant to write it down. I just didn't do it. But Daniel has the answer. So Daniel, this is another way we're trying to get you back on the show. Lure you in here. We need that answer. Just saying.
But the interesting thing is there are all these Pod News and, Podcast Motor and all these different, Pacific, that companies here, but not a single play button on the page.
Right.
So is this a case where I would have to search for somebody's podcast to then have an actual play button come up? It's not like they're putting podcasts up.
It's still new, so it doesn't have everything.
Well, hang on. So this is an excellent example of search intent, and Google puts a lot of weight in search intent. So when someone is asking that specific question, how long should a podcast be? They're looking for an answer, a quick answer, an easy answer, and that's why the Audacity to Podcast shows up in the knowledge box on top. And all the other links up here answer that question. How long and how often should you podcast? Another one. Well, that's the same one from Daniel, right? And so then Pod News and, how long, because those are the answers somebody wants. This intent, people aren't expecting to listen to a podcast episode that tells them the answer of how long a podcast can be. So that's, I would never expect to see podcast episode results coming up for that particular query. But if you are searching for something where listening to a podcast would give you the best possible result for that, chances are, either now or in the very near future, Google would put that list of those episodes on top.
What kind of questions do you think would surface a podcast episode?
Well, that comes back to the question that I would ask the two of you. When is listening to a podcast the best possible number one result Google should surface? I don't have an answer for that. It's an open-ended question. We need to think.
I mean, if you asked, what was the, what happened with the cult in Waco? Like maybe now I'm asking for a story. Tell me a story. And I might not be one who wants to read a story. I then might see, if it's optimized, right? And it says, here's the story of Waco. I'd be like, holy cow, I want to go down that rabbit hole. Maybe that might work.
So see, I think that's a great one. I mean, if you searched for, and I just did this, podcast episodes about the Waco cult, I just typed that in there. I don't get any podcast results. I mean, the first listing is actually from Stitcher, so you'd think I would get a podcast episode play button, but I don't. So that's weird.
What?
But the second thing listed are a series of videos.
Right.
Herein lies your answer, because I think you could make an argument that what's the difference between a 48-minute long video that talks about the Waco siege versus a 48-minute audio podcast?
I can't take it and go. I want to take it and leave my computer and move on with my life while I listen.
So I think the answer that I'm coming up with is eventually, and not yet because of relevancy and the way Google counts links, I think eventually you will start seeing podcast episodes edge out videos. That's where I think the real opportunity lies.
For stories, yeah. So, okay, I went to an incognito window. What does that really, how much does that do for me? When I go to incognito window and I type in my show versus, what's that doing for me exactly? Is it really, because, okay, if I'm logged in or I'm in my regular browser and I type in if I type in Podcasters Roundtable, it knows what I'm most likely looking for, right? But if I go to incognito window, does it think a stranger is looking for this?
Well, not necessarily a stranger, but it takes away all the personal stuff.
What it knows about me.
It still knows where you are. I mean, incognito has to have some geography attached to it. So it still knows some things, but it doesn't look at your prior search history any longer. It doesn't look at, it still looks at some cookies, but it's giving you the cleanest possible view of what any other person who their first time ever coming to Google, who just happens to sit maybe next door to you, who happens to be on the same internet provider as you, a search result they might get, assuming, here's the trick with incognito, assuming that person has never searched on Google before. So it's all, and everybody has, right? So for everybody else, we're always getting personalized stuff. So incognito takes all the personal away, except no one literally ever searches Google without some personal information. But it's a good way to get away from you. You
say it takes it away, but it's not taking it away. I don't understand. You say, huh?
What do you mean it's not taking it away?
You say if I've ever searched on Google, then even incognito is being affected by that?
No. If you're an incognito, it will take away your personal preferences. I'm saying that that would mean a baby is born and then raised to the age of 18 years old and given a fresh computer for the first time and shown Google. That just doesn't happen, right?
But is it a good way? It's a good way for podcasters to look at their own show, right?
I think it's, for two reasons. One, it's a good way to get an understanding of without your own personal biases that Google's put on you on top of it, number one. I said two reasons, but one thing to think about, you have to be careful. If you're the kind of person who continues to search for your show over and over and over again, you're sending negative feedback about your results to Google. Every time you search on something and you don't click on something, you've just told Google that was a bad search engine results page experience.
Even in incognito?
Even in incognito.
I asked because I am curious when we're talking about, is your podcast searchable, and podcasters want to know this question. They would want to go to incognito, but in theory, they should be just clicking all over the place once they get there.
Well, what they should do is find themselves. If you really want to do it, go to incognito, search for your podcast, and scroll through to page 97, and then eventually click on yourself. That tells Google, hey, this person was really seeking out this particular product. Let's give a little bit of a boost. Now, the reality is we're talking about a tiny amount of boost or detraction when this happens. Just don't do it all the time. Or but here's the thing, if you're searching for your unique podcast name and it's weird and there are just a handful of results and you're trying to get from the third position to the first position and you don't click on it every time you search, maybe, suddenly there's a lot more weight of your non-click action.
Right. We just scared a lot of people. I like it. Okay. So we're going to help out this show, because if I put in the Podcaster Studio into incognito and search, I've got my website at the top, very cool, and then I've got the Podcaster Studio on Apple Podcast and the three recent, I use recent very loosely, episodes with a play button. Cool. If I do that for Podcasters Roundtable,
not so much.
I don't score any play buttons. I do get the website, number one, stellar. So I'm not sure why it's not up there. I get my videos because we are in video live right now. Podcasters Roundtable, youtube.com. I said that backwards. And YouTube is the third. And then Podcasters Roundtable on Apple Podcasts, but it doesn't surface play buttons.
Right.
What's going on? Why is this show not getting play buttons?
My guess is the videos dominate. Because
so much that it's not even going to show. I mean, okay, let me go to the next page. Do they even surface play buttons deeper than the first page?
I've never seen them any deeper than the first page.
Yeah. Which is also interesting.
But then again, I don't typically see video results anywhere but the first page either.
And I'm seeing video results deep.
Are you now?
Yeah,
okay.
Well, second page. Yeah, it's funny because on the second page of that, I do see 2 video results, which is interesting. All right.
What has now changed my thought about this is when I first thought about this, I'm like, wow, we really need to think, not that we shouldn't think about them anyway, but if you have a minute long intro, maybe you should think about cutting that down to 30 seconds. But on the other hand, as we've done this now, I'm like, it's like you said, I don't think people are going to be finding our podcast amongst answers for questions. So I don't think that's not, I was really thinking about that. I'm like, maybe I need to redo my intro and make it like really like boom, hit play. Cause that's what YouTube videos do, right? Hey, welcome to in this video, I'm going to show you how to blank, or I'm going to answer this question. And we don't do that in podcasts.
YouTube teaches a producer to be one thing very specifically. It is get to the effing point, and don't waste my time, right? Podcasts, not always good at that. And some of the appeal to podcasts for both producers and listeners is that you don't have to be. It's not rushed. It's not put upon you. But when I think about it in terms of pressing a play button in a search, man, I do not want to sit through stuff. So your intro, even if your intro doesn't answer the question, and Evo's brought up this great point that I don't think it might not be surfaced for questions, but even if you want the story, man, you better hook quick, seems like.
And I'm sorry, that's a bad idea. Why?
Which part?
You get to the point and hook somebody right away.
No, it's a great idea.
Bad idea.
No, Dave said that he noticed on YouTube, and I said, that's what YouTube has taught me.
Yeah, but earlier you just said, but we don't have to do that in podcasting. And
no, well, we don't have to. I'm saying one of the differences, I would say a glaring difference between YouTube and podcasting is that YouTube people really click off. And I think it's the nature of the way you're able to browse YouTube. I can jump from one video to another. And when you take too long to get, because I did just happen to come across you on YouTube, podcast, way more deliberate. I've decided I'm in for this, right? So as I'm talking about as producers, the format traditionally to this point has been a little different. I feel like you have more time as a podcaster to even banter with the co-host or the audience. I'm not saying that's the way you should do it. I'm saying it's what I think the medium has allowed to this point.
It certainly has allowed. I'm sorry, Dave, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we're in, let's say Evo has a show. It's the Evo Terra Hour. And it's like, hey, welcome to the Evo Terra Hour. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's a marketing guy. He's, blah, blah, blah. He's the best thing since sliced bread. Here he is, Evo Terra. Is that going to stick around now? Because it lets people know why they should listen to you. And so it's a great setup. I mean, if you think about it, the Brady Bunch, the beginning of the Brady Bunch.
Here's a story.
Set up every single. They just went right to the content. Like, oh my God,
a man named Brady.
Marsha broke her nose. Why could they just jump right to that story? Because we already knew the setup.
I don't disagree with that, but let's not forget that was 1974.
Good point.
A great year.
2019.
Fantastic year.
This is 2019, and every television show I watch, which isn't a lot, I'll grant you that, but every television show I watch starts.
Yeah.
And then
that's a really good point.
After 5 minutes, there's the intro, and it takes, 15 seconds. And then it goes back to the story, and then they put the credits over the top of it. Why are they doing that? Well, because that's what people of 2019 are actually into right now. So go ahead.
My wife queued up Chitty Chitty Bang Bang for my daughter the other night on TV. And dude, and I realized, I'm like, old movies used to show you the opening scene was 5 minutes of credits overlaid over the scene. So they were giving you both, but it was such a different format. So much stuff.
That's what, as Evo said that, I thought about that. The TV shows I do watch, a lot of times it's boom, it starts. Maybe they'll show their logo for a half a second, then it starts, and they're putting like starring so-and-so. So it's down in the bottom right-hand corner. So they're doing those credits, but it's almost like it's almost like a banner ad on the side.
I'm watching shows on Netflix now that aren't Netflix originals. I mean, these were on AMC or on whatever, and now they're being done again. And so they a lot of times will have the previously on, and they'll do that. And now on Netflix, there's a button to skip it.
Nice.
There's a button to skip intro.
This
goes I love to about it.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, the thing I love about Netflix is if you are binge watching something, when you get to the end and you go next episode, not only does it go to the next episode, it skips the intro of the next episode. So you're going from, hey, the content ended, boom, next episode right now. You don't have to.
You're right, because I watched House of Cards, and it would give you. I remember when it made the switch, and it was like skip intro. Now the intro is fantastic. So sometimes I actually want to experience it. It's a nice time lapse. It's got great music. There's a whole podcast episode on the music. But a lot of times I want to get to it. But this is I play in this like dichotomy all the time because I hate sort of branded, repeated intros of podcasts. I get the point and the purpose, and they're probably right to do this repeatable stuff. That intro that Dave just gave for Evo, you can clip it and use it in your new show, Devo. You better register a domain because Dave's going to grab it.
Right.
But, that annoys me. And for the purpose of that, I almost feel like the new listener, people want to orient their shows for the new listener. Yes. Whereas I want to orient the show for the listener, someone who comes back every week. Like, I don't want that in their way because they've earned it. They know where they're at. Like the new listener, sometimes there's part of when you're a new listener, I think you're willing to even like, you have a little stuff to get through. Like it's sort of like earn the like be a listener. Like I want to figure out the inside joke, or I don't know. I don't like templated, formatted, what feels like marketing intros, but I get the point. So I'm always stuck between there's a need to tell people who you are, where you're at, what you're going to get. But the person who comes back every week, like I don't want to hear that. Like most podcasts I subscribe to, we're looking at 30 to 60 second skips before I get to where I want to be as a subscriber. I know the first stuff.
Well, Jimmy Fallon on the Tonight Show about maybe a month ago, He used to have his whole thing, the big song, and they had the intro with him walking down the street while the one guy would announce who was coming on the show, which I always thought was stupid because after the monologue, Jimmy would go to the desk and then say, who's coming on the show? I go, I know, I just heard what's his name. So they needed to cut one of the two. They cut it out of the intro. The intro now is Welcome to the Night Show with Jimmy Fallon. Here's your host, Jimmy Fallon. The intro song now is like half a chorus, and then Jimmy comes out and starts telling jokes.
People think that this is because, at least Americans, we've gotten impatient, and I think it's just because there's so much to choose from, which goes with podcasts.
And I think if you look back at the reason that Netflix is doing things like adding this skip intro button, and the reason that television shows are getting shorter is because they get data, whether it's real or imaginary. Well, Netflix gets real data. They know what it takes to keep people hooked and listening. The reason that YouTube videos are set up the way that we talked about before, where that's, this is what's happening, is we're going to learn, here we go, let's go, is they get feedback. YouTube provides feedback back to the creators and back and forth, and we're able to watch and see how these things rise and fall in the algorithm based on what people are actually doing. And so in both of those cases, they've said shorter and quicker and to the point is better. We don't have that feedback algorithm in podcasting. We don't have any of that information. We don't know. We're getting a little bit of it nowadays, but there's not the larger point. And I have a funny feeling that if we were to look at the data and find out what people are actually doing at the show, we would probably find out that people like it and reward us when we actually do just get to the goddamn point.
I've never had somebody complain, I like your show, but you get to the point too quick.
No, it's never going to happen.
Yeah. I will say, I don't put a lot of emphasis on my Apple stats when I go into Podcast Connect and look at those, because it's not the majority of my audience. Well, maybe it is, but anyway, but I can see where people skip my intro because I have I think 86% of the people listen to my show are subscribed. So they've heard, and it's the same intro every week, even though it's not pre-written or whatever. It's the same, I'm going to massage your message, Dave Jackson, blah, blah, blah. And then I try to jump right into the content, but the first 40 seconds are pretty much the same thing, besides the fact that the first 5 are me teasing what's coming up. But I can see where people are like, I'm just going to jump to like a minute because that's where Dave gets to the stuff. My
intro for me is 5 seconds.
Yeah, I've it's funny because I have a branded YouTube like motion graphic, and I cut it down to 5 seconds to give as much information as possible in 5 seconds, because YouTube, it's got to be there. And I think where I'm the challenge, I still think it is good to have some kind of branded identifying message. People know where they are, where to go to, or mine floats in, it says raretakeo.com, whatever, and it's over. We're right into it. But one of my pet peeves and advice to YouTubers, it's so funny to hear so many YouTubers will give you this 30-second, 40-second long thing, and then they'll say, "Let's get right into it." And like, no, dude, you didn't just get right into it. It's
right was over there. You left right. You're light years from right now.
Oh my gosh. So hey, you know what would be cool, and I think is a good idea, and I would want to, with my dilemma, train my audience that, hey, 30 seconds is my intro. So you can I think 30-second skip is standard. Like when you key up a new episode, you go ahead and hit that 30-second skip for subscribers. That's your bonus. Like, where you're at, hit the 30-second, and new people will get the 30 seconds. I'm not against something as long as it's brief, and 30 seconds might be too long, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
I want to challenge you on why that 30 seconds is necessary for new people.
So I don't complete. That's what I'm saying. I am saying that I think it's good to have. I don't know. That's part of my dilemma, right? Like, this is what we hear.
Because people name their show stupid. That's it. And you're like, what is this podcast rodeo show? Not the greatest name in the world. Is it about rodeo? Is it about podcasting? What is it?
That person, here's the thing is, though, people who choose to click on a podcast choose for a reason. They've either read your description or an episode. They know kind of what they're getting into, right? So they don't necessarily need you to clarify the title. I mean, it's not YouTube. They didn't stumble across you in most cases. Why am I here? Like,
there is something that happened that predicated them clicking listen, and you don't know what that is. But still, I think even if they did it blindly, even if a friend said, "You got to watch this, you got to listen to this, check it out," 30 seconds, and I'm using the number because it was used previously, 30 seconds of saying, this is what my podcast show is all about. This is who I am. This is the preamble stuff. I don't think you need. I mean, that's not why your friend gave you that link. They gave you that link because the content was compelling. So just
podcast pontifications. You do it though. You give us a why we're here, what it is, right? You do?
No, podcast motivation. So what I do, I tell you what this episode is going to be about, and I do that within a sentence. Then there's a jump, little 4-second little boom, and then I say, hello and welcome to another podcast pontifications with me, Evo Terra. Boom, right into it. I don't talk about my background. I don't talk about.
We used to say there was like they used to clear it up, like this is not a podcast about.
I used to do that. Yeah,
okay.
I used to say if you're listening to the pod, if you're watching this on video, this is not a podcast.
Yes.
It's a video about a podcast. But I did that only for the video. In the audio, that got cut out.
All right.
I sliced that out. So now I've gotten rid of that completely because I don't what I think of what a podcast is, what you two gentlemen think of what a podcast is vastly different than what people think a podcast is. So screw it. Whatever they think a podcast is, they're happy to listen. So I'm not doing that education anymore. So now it is one sentence on what the episode is about, then a little branding thing the little bump up music where my slide plays. Then I say, hello and welcome to another podcast pontifications with me, Evo Terra. Boom,
Yeah,
right into the topic.
I think the best question is, what do you guys think is important at the beginning of a podcast? This show starts with, I say podcast roundtable round 130, and then I state the topic, and then I introduce the people. Like, this show has no goals. It's just us geeking out. There are no goals for the show. I don't care. I probably don't need to identify the episode number or the title of the show. I just do it. Maybe it's a crutch, whatever.
Sure.
At least it's fast. But what do we think is important? Because look, at anyone who watches this show listens to a million freaking other shows about how to market their podcast, how to get more listeners. And the marketers, whoever those people are, will tell you, oh, you need this branded sort of, tagline, right? So people know where they are, what they'll get, how long it'll take. You need this stuff, or people won't connect or know your purpose and how you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
all crap.
Well, it's funny because this has really got me thinking, because I used to say you have to tease the episode, then you have to so they know. I always think of it as a bus. You have to let people know where they're going. So tease the episode, then explain what the show is briefly. If you can briefly explain why they should listen to you. That's the part now I'm really thinking is crap. And then get to the content. Because if you get right to the content and hook them in with, did you know that you can, turn dog crap into gold? People are going to listen. So that was it for the brand new listener. Because why, especially the whole, you need to, establish your street cred so people will keep listening. Well, if you have great street cred, but you start off putting your foot in your mouth, I don't care how much street cred you have. I'm gone.
Here's a question for you guys. When is the last time that you read a blog post? And you've all read a blog post sometime in the last week, I'm assuming. But when is the last time that when you were sent to a link to the blog post, it started with the about page? Never does.
I click away to the about page and then I go back to the
right, exactly. Right. So yeah, you can do that, where you can read the description and see what the show is about. Don't tell me. I don't need to read all that stuff. I came here for a reason. You don't know what that reason is. So don't worry about trying to pander to that. Just tell me what you want to tell me.
So not pandering to, because it is a good question. Who are we most programming for? The new listener or the subscriber, right? The person that comes back. Mm-hmm. The person who does come back. So there are people who come back blindly. It's just the next episode.
Yeah.
What should you be, is it good to at least tell you we're going to cover A, B, and C? Like I have tried to give us the main topic here. This always goes somewhere else.
Of course.
But do we want to establish, at least for the person who blindly clicks play on the next episode, what the heck they're going to get out of that? And why are we doing that? So they can leave if they want? You know what I mean? Like, I don't waste your time.
Yeah, that's my whole thing. I don't want and people always go, well, what if they leave? And I go, then I just save them 20 minutes. And if somebody says, hey, today we're going to be talking about how to set 60 band or a 300 band EQ, okay, that's great. I'm not an engineer. Don't need that. Thank you. Bye. And I'm gone. So, and I will appreciate that. And I'll tune in next week and
Except
probably
it's dangerous. Like because I have said in the beginning of my episodes, like, hey, we're going to talk about post-processing, but even if you don't post-process, there is stuff to learn here, right? Like whether that's send it off here or do this automatic thing. Like there's still stuff to learn. So I am hesitant to scare people away, like under the guise of I'm saving you time. There might still be, I mean, it depends on how you plan your content. If you specifically know there's nothing in it for you, but that's hard to say. People come to podcasts for all kinds of different reasons. It's hard to assume what the audience wants and needs. We're not Apple. We don't make up what people want and need.
You're exactly right. It is hard. So don't try to do that. I follow a similar model to what Dave recommends, and that is this is what you're going to get today. Look, I produce 4 episodes every single week. Even people who subscribe to Podcast Pontifications don't listen to all 4 every single week. I get it. That's too much. Even though they're only less than 10 minutes long each, that's a lot of content to consume. So I want to be respectful of their time. This is what I'm covering. That's what I tell you. And then the implied tone is, if that's not for you, then you can skip this episode. I'm okay with that. I don't say that out loud,
right.
but I make that available. To your specific questions, because you asked the question of who is more valuable, the person who is currently subscribed and listening to your show all the time, or the new person. The unpopular answer is it's the new person. Because what you and I and Dave, we all know, we've all seen this that happens. If we poll our most rabid fans on what they want from us, they always want the same thing. They want more. And they tend not to go away because they're rabid fans. They'll pretty much listen to whatever we give them because they want to listen to us for whatever reason they want to listen to us. So it's not that they're less valuable to me. It's they're investing.
You're abusing them.
I'm not abusing them because I'm making it shorter. I'm making it more concise. I want the new person to get it. I don't feel like I need to go sing Kumbaya around the fire with everybody. But I try to. There's no detriment to putting the good content up front. It's the upside down writing style. It's to tell them the most important stuff up front so they get what they need. Newspapers know how to do this. Here's the story. You don't have to read all 500 words. But here's the important part up front. And if you want to keep going, keep going.
It still feels like marketing because we are, I'd rather serve the subscriber just in terms of, it doesn't mean I do it. Yeah. I feel like I'd rather say, thank you for showing up every week. Let's just start the effing show. Like,
yeah, but you should do that.
The new listener can figure out how to get in the club. Like if the content's good, they'll stay. Like I
don't disagree. I don't think you have to. The only thing I disagree with is you don't have to say thanks for listening. I mean, they're already listening. They don't need your thanks. They want you to keep making show. But just get to it. Just get to it. That's the new listener and the old listener likes it when you just get to it. And I know. There are plenty of people in the chat room right now are disagreeing with me saying, but I like the banter. I like the witty 5 minutes when person A and person B talk about nothing important before they finally get to the content. Well, I don't know that that's true. I mean, I think that you, who's typing that right now, may feel that way, but the rest, not so much. If you want the banner, that's fine. Put it at the end. Put it somewhere else where people who are invested will go more and play around. But just get on with it.
The banter lovers are podcasters who like to banter.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right about that. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I'm not anti-banter, but yeah, I do think you could shift it. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, there is a skip button for the reason. That's all I'm saying. I use it. A lot.
I almost only use the skip button for 2 reasons. One, when I know that the 30-second pre-roll, and I can tell.
Yeah.
Or when it is, I know the show. Like, for example, I'm not going to throw him under the bus because there's another podcast about podcasting, and Mark Asquith isn't with us, so I'm not going to throw him under the bus completely. But, I hit that 4 times on his show because it's 2 minutes of him selling an email marketing program.
Yeah.
Before he gets to the content, right? And so it's skip. And then that's usually about the time he's done. And then I go into it.
You're the user he can abuse because you're not going away.
Yeah, but that's not good for new users either. So I disagree that that's actually good for a new user.
Well, Mark's going to be on the show, I guarantee. So
that's fine. That's not good for a new user either. That's good for him getting revenue from the email marketing company, perhaps, But I don't think that's good for the new listener. I think they get tired of that pretty quickly when it's the same sales pitch over and over again.
Well, that's good because we have a whole nother roundtable we can do there.
All right.
Taylor, pulling back to search. Dave, it sounded like you had a good question in the chat.
Yeah, this came from Kim Craggy from Toastmasters101.net. She says, if we're seeing people go to episodes rather than shows, should we be promoting with SEO and cornerstone content? In other words, Yoast talks a lot about that. A cornerstone content is, I'm doing this right now. I'm working on an episode that's going to be everything I've ever learned about interviews. I've talked about interviews in the past, but I'm going to make this big, giant, nothing but interviews, kind of like in the same way that last week on Jimmy Fallon, they did an episode with Howard Stern. He was the only guest. So mine's going to be, this is my interview show. If you want to learn about interviews, go to that episode. And then what you do is anytime in the future, then if I ever hint about anything about interviews, I'm going to link back to this mother of all posts about interviews. They call that cornerstone content. So Kim is saying, hey, if we're going to be, sending people to episodes, if that's the way we're going to be found, should those episodes then be marketed as cornerstone content? What say you?
I say almost yes on everything that she said, because look, SEO gets a lot of bad rap, deservedly. It gets a lot of rap. But I don't like the word SEO. I like SEF, search engine friendly. And if we do things that are search engine friendly, like that, like having cornerstone content, like having topic clusters, like all the other things that people who do SEO for a living know about. I'm not talking about the black hatters who, stuff keywords and all stuff we know we're not supposed to do, or put out episode titles or blog post titles based on very weird keyword strings, like buy real estate Phoenix market right now. And that's okay. That's the title of my page because somebody did one query on that. No, those things are dumb. But yeah, I do think, Kim, that since we are seeing people go to episodes rather than shows, we as podcast creators should recognize and create content that are going to fulfill the need that those people are turning to Google and searching for. We're not letting SEO drive our content. That's not what I'm talking about. But it is just being smart and putting out the kind of information, using the kinds of words, using the kinds of structure that we know Google likes that rewards us properly. Why wouldn't we do that?
I tend to think I ignore SEO because it's something that always changes, and I just don't want to do things where things are going to change. It's easier for me not to care. Dave put it in the chat very well. He said, I try to write for people and hope Google likes it. Mm-hmm. But Evo, you're saying search engine friendly things, which I think is a good way to approach it and is similar. And I'm wondering, how do we help people be more search engine friendly? So it sounds like those are things that Google is always going to like, because it serves the purpose of surfacing the thing that people are asking when they're in a search, right? So what are some of those things for podcasters that is search engine friendly, as opposed to saying, what exactly does Google want today that they're not going to want 2 weeks from now?
So one thing to fix. So Google, when Google makes changes, Google makes changes to their algorithm all the time. And usually once or twice a year, they make a pretty sweeping change to the algorithm. Those changes they're making to the algorithm are strictly designed to cut the black hatters out. It's not that Google changed what they want. It's Google found a way to detect bad behavior. Right. In almost every case, and I've done this for a very long time with Google. I've seen the changes they make. And in almost every case, it is designed to get the bad stuff out. It is always designed to improve the results that they see. If you follow what Google Webmasters talks about, the way that they want you to produce content, they don't go into great detail about that. They want you to get the spirit, the idea behind it of just simply creating good, solid content. Clear and concise titles. You asked for some very specific things. So clear and concise titles are continue to be important. Not keyword stuff, but just clear and concise titles. Google likes really long form content, like 1,000 words or more, way more than they like a couple of sentences about your episode.
So that's a deep show notes, is
if you want to call it that. Sure. Google likes longer form content way better than like thin content. They like valuable content where you're adding new information to the conversation, as opposed to just regurgitating what's available on 17 other web pages well, more like 17,000 different web pages. Google likes it when you link out to others and you're helping spread this thing we call the web around. They don't like it when you don't do that, when your content is just isolated on its own. Really, all Google wants you to do is create awesome content that human beings want to consume. And if you do that and you follow some basic technical guidelines to let their crawler go through and grab the content you need, they're going to reward you for that. They will always reward you for that.
This is the shift, right? We talk about as podcasters and people who talk to podcasts, we always say, make awesome content.
Yeah.
And the shift now is that you can't just make awesome content in audio, although it sounds like Google's going to dig into the audio soon. They are already. But we've always talked about supplementing that awesome content via your website or online, right? Something that Google can grab onto, right? If they're not doing transcriptions. So obviously a website seems important, but not everyone.
Just to piggyback on what Evo was saying, I threw this idea out at the School of Podcasting, and a couple of people tried it because it's kind of like, well, I'm running out of ideas. So I'm going to talk about a fake podcast. So Ray, what podcast am I going to talk about? I'm curious to know, because what is the top favorite fake podcast
of yours?
No, just make one up. Somebody goes, oh, it's a podcast about
Pinky and the Wiz show is my favorite.
What? Knitting. Everybody just talks about the infamous.
Well, I would say quilting, but yes,
cool. Okay, so I went to Google and typed in "getting started in knitting," and if I'm like, I'm not sure what my first few episodes should be, go down to those questions because it's telling you what people are searching for. Which is easier to learn, knitting or crocheting? What do beginner knitters need? Say that 3 times fast. What knitting needles are the best for beginners? And what tools are needed for knitting? There's your first 5 episodes.
You know what I would say too? Go to freaking YouTube and go to the biggest knitting channels and look at their, because they've already figured it all out. They know the big channels already figured out what people are looking for and really grab onto. Go look at their top producing video, translate into audio and make this is actually a great form. I love this. Actually, we're just going to steal YouTube content and make it big splash in audio.
Yeah. Your mama said, don't go play in traffic. I'm like, no, find out where the traffic is.
Yeah.
Which just goes back to what we're always talking about, know who your target audience is and give them what they want. Well, that's kind of a way of at least getting a hint.
The beauty of, what I love about YouTube is you can actually, if you want to call it competition, your niche, whatever, you can see what the ceiling is. If I start a podcast about podcasting, I have no idea. I assume Dave gets 7,000 listens per every school of podcasting, but nothing tells me that. If I go to YouTube and I start my channel and I'm reviewing camera gear, I see other people in that niche, and guess what? They have the biggest guy has 1.5 million subs. I know I can reach that. It's reachable. Like, I know the market's there because in this case, more than one person has 1 million subs in that niche. I don't know that you get that. You don't get that. You don't have any kind of measuring stick against which to measure yourself in a podcast. I mean, you could go and see what's in the top charts, but you don't know if that's 1 million listens or 1,000. Doesn't mean that matters. Or it's accurate. Yeah, it's not a chart. Gosh, that made me think of something else.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good stuff. Blogs versus show notes. We recently produced an episode at work. We had an interview with the Impossible Burgers guy, which was freaking compelling, and it was really cool, and made me very interested in the product. But
tasty.
We did this thing, like we did an episode with him, and we do our regular show notes where it consists of favorite quotes and some highlights and just various things. But then the host, who's also a writer, went out and made a blog post, and then we put the embed player in the bug. So we produced 2 pieces of content, but why aren't show notes blogs? Should show notes just be blog posts? What's the difference? Like, you know what I mean? Should there be a blog? Is there a difference to show notes and blogs? Should you be doing a blog post on the same episode that you put on your website? You know what I'm saying? Like, when we're thinking about search and building like stuff that people want to consume, should you just...
I hear what you're saying. And so my answer to that question is we podcasters abuse the term show notes.
Yeah.
Because to me, it means 2 different things. One means the website, the web-focused landing page you're assembling for this particular episode.
Right.
You might call that a blog post. You might call that an article, whatever you need to, but that's the idea. It is designed to sit there so that when someone is searching the entire topic that we're supposed to be covering on this particular episode, but that's fine. We'll get back to it.
They're not supposed to.
That's its primary job. So when someone is searching around, looking for something, that attracts someone's attention. So you write your landing page, your article, your blog post for someone who's never heard of you before, who's never listened to your show.
I think show notes, I think we in the past have primarily written show notes for the people who are listening, because we're like, go to the show notes for the links. And
which is a mistake, right? Which is a mistake. And let me explain why. So yes, you want it. Primary audience is a brand new person, but absolutely, you want all those links in the show notes. You want those links out. Like I was listening to Every Little Thing, which is a show that's part of Gimlet, and they put like 150 references in the blog post they write for their articles, because they go out and research a lot of these things. So there are actually references in there. So you want it for all of those reasons, but you want it so that that blog post, that article, is consumable without ever having to listen to the audio, which is anathema to us in the podcasting world. We want them to listen. Well, it's content. You're writing content based on your articles, based on your podcast is the way I think about the blog post version of the show notes. The second part of show notes is that which goes into your podcast app. That which goes into the RSS feed, either into the description field or the content encoded field. That's a different person. The only way those are ever going to be seen by someone is A, they have to listen in a podcast listening app. Do we call them podcatchers anymore? Anyhow, they have to be listening in a podcast listening app, and B, and it's a very, very small B, they actually have to click through and figure out how to listen to those notes, because most people don't. Most people who listen to a podcast have it in their back pocket, have it somewhere else. They're not reading along as they go. But those show notes, if you will, I call those microcopy. That microcopy needs to be written with the assumption that someone is either listening right now or has taken some call to action that you made in the audio and has clicked through to find that content. It's very different. It has probably links sitting close to the top so they can quickly get to the information they need. It's more of a reference point when they're actually listening. So when I create show notes for my clients' content, we create two very different show notes. We create that landing page, 1,000 words or so, and then we create the microcopy, which is a condensed, easier version to consume based on the same content, but two very different audiences.
Does your landing page version tell a story on its own, or just sort of give you headings for what's covered? You know what I mean? Like Daniel does a great job. I can't tell you, and I've talked about this plenty of times, I can't tell how many times I've gone to like the Audacity to Podcast to get an answer, because I know it's in the show notes. It's in the episode, what we're calling show notes. It's in the write-up. I didn't have to go into the episode to get my answer, and I appreciate that.
Exactly.
Dave's going crazy
right there.
Yeah.
So that's why you do that. I do the same thing. I did it. I switched about a year ago. I now type up a blog post to help me flesh out what the heck I'm actually going to say on the episode. I used to do it the other way. I would come up with
you're writing the story as opposed to telling it telling you what's in the story.
Yeah, because I used to do like, here's my 4 bullet points I'm going to cover, and I would record it, and then I would type a full blog post, and inevitably I go, ooh, I should have said this when I recorded. So I do it differently now. I write the blog post, I come up with bullet points based on the blog post, record it, and then I'm done. But yeah, and so I have people go, well, that means some people might come to the website and get what they want out of the article and not listen. I'm like,
yes.
And you just said it. I appreciate the fact that I can get the answer without listening, which makes you value that website in whatever way. You're a content creator. If you want to read it, read it.
That's right.
If you want, so.
Yeah, you gave them the content. The content gave them what they wanted. You didn't force a container on them. You didn't force an audio container when they just wanted to read something. So fine, let them read it.
And this is what I'm thinking too when it comes to search. Like this, Google's going to want this, right? So, and then Eva, I was kind of asking, like, are you writing the landing page for that episode to tell its own story, or is it just saying, here's what's in the episode?
No, it is a complete. It is here's the story we are telling. We mentioned the fact that we're doing one right now for a company in Colorado that specializes in adoption, and throughout there we're saying in the episode you'll hear the host say this, but it is. Many people just read because most of the content is there. We give away the answers there, but we don't want somebody to assume that there is no podcast. We wanted to let them know that actually exists. There's an embedded player, and we mentioned during the episode we're talking about these things, but we say the things. It's not just here are the. I used to do it this way, where here's 2 paragraphs about what the overall topic's going to be, and now here are the 8 bullet points of the most key important things that we said, and that's it. I don't do that anymore. I know that Google rewards longer form content. So now we listen to the episode in real time and we write out a good, compelling blog post as if someone doesn't even need to listen. That's the way we're doing it these days.
I'm typing in President of America, which is because there's a let's see if according to Uncle Google, approximately 15% of America adults aged 18 to 35 are deaf. I didn't think it would be that high.
That sounds like a big number.
Yeah, I might have to redo that search. But those are the people that really love long blog posts that you don't force to, listen to a podcast, are people that,
Well, and I mean, I think there's probably this idea that people don't read anymore, blog posts or blogs dead or something, but everyone chooses. My wife wants to read it. I actually want to watch it. So Evo, I bet you guys maybe are also making videos about the same topic too, right? So when we talk about search, the point is you can help your podcast by building more content, more formats that people want to consume that content in. Like don't be worried so much about forcing them into the audio. If you're able to give them the ability to read it and then maybe watch it if you have that time. I mean, this show, you can watch it or read it. Or you can't read it, or you can listen to it. In fact, what I would call show notes about the worst example ever for this show. Like I just you can say I don't care. Sorry,
no, I get it, right? And that's the thing. It takes time. I mean, I'll tell you this: for podcast pontifications, less than 10 minutes every episode. It takes me 1 hour to write the article that accompanies with it, and that's after I have fed it. I have fed the finalized audio into a machine transcription that gives it back to me. So I'm not like I'm having to listen to everything. In fact, I don't listen at all. I just take that machine transcription and go, holy shit, I just rambled about that for 9 different sentences. I said the exact same thing. I can cut all that out of there, but it takes me 1 solid hour to write up 10 minutes worth of audio when I already have the transcription. It takes time to do that.
So, okay. Why is it so important to you then? Why don't you just skip it? Right?
Because I want people to discover the content.
Right. That's it. You think it's that critical to discovering the content.
Yes.
It is chum in the water, buddy.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Exactly. Because my audience, I'm trying to reach people who, even though I talk, my avatar is a weird avatar, but when I write that blog post, it's for someone who is not a constant consumer of podcasts. They look a lot like my clients. My clients don't even listen to their own goddamn show. They don't know anybody else's that are out there, right? But they do search, they do read, they do consume a lot of content, and they do searches on LinkedIn and Medium and places like that where they're looking for that. They're looking for experts to give them the right answer. So if I can write 1,000 words based off of a 10-minute conversation I just had with myself, that's good information for someone to consume. So it is absolutely worth it for me to do that.
This may be a comment here said that Circular Podcast said, where people found me on Medium and LinkedIn as well. When we're thinking about search and we're talking about Google, and we're talking about how Google is surfacing Apple Podcast results. So Apple Podcast is ranking better in search for the Podcaster Studio, but YouTube is ranking better for search for this show.
Yep.
As podcasters, there are other sites. He's saying, essentially Medium and LinkedIn leverage really well for him.
Sure.
Or her, sorry.
Yeah.
But gosh, this starts to sound like there's a lot to do.
There is a lot to do. But there's as much to do as you want to do.
Right.
And so it's super. I use LinkedIn and Medium because that's where, I use Medium for different reasons than LinkedIn because I want businesses. I got to go to LinkedIn, and I've started posting full articles on LinkedIn right now, because that's where people are sometimes looking for consuming content or being exposed to content, not necessarily searching for it.
Medium, does Google surface? They'll surface Medium posts.
It'll surface Medium posts. I don't know about LinkedIn articles or not.
Yeah.
It's not like Facebook. It's not that walled of a garden. But I don't know that they've done a good job of connecting all of that content together. But it goes back to the intent thing with Medium. Medium, articles are searched on Medium, sure, they're surfaced through Google, but most Medium articles, I shouldn't say most, a good number of Medium articles are discovered the same way Netflix content's discovered. They're presented to people on the homepage. They have a curated homepage that's part algorithm, part human being that says these are the things that you should read next. So that's a great place to do things. That's less about search and more about Medium is where I go to find content in this particular area. So that's happening as well. But you got to create content. Medium's not going to find your content. You actually have to go to Medium and put your content there, which serves its own challenges.
It's early days. Is there anything we should be thinking about as podcasters in terms of what, I want to be found in Google for my podcast? And then, I guess, I don't know if anyone's listened to the new media show recently. Todd went on a rant about how it's not surfacing the website, right? Like if it's pointing you to Apple and he's in theory the leading authority on his podcast, he wants it to go to like newmediashow.com. I go listen to that recent episode on New Media Show. There's a lot there. And the audience should go check it out because Rob and Todd bring up some other issues that we haven't dealt with here. And I always just think things are so early and things are going to change so fast. What do we want to focus on as podcasters? I don't want to focus on something specific that's being done right now that's surfacing. If it's like a tech thing, you're talking about rel links and all this stuff. What's best practice for the long haul? Is there anything we should be changing? Maybe that's it. Google's in the game finally. They're surfacing podcasts. They're going to make it a first-class citizen is the thing we're hearing across the place now. Spotify, everyone wants to make a podcast first-class citizen, whatever that means.
Right. Surface
to the top. Should we be changing something that we've been doing for the last 14 years? Is there something new to do? There's always something new to do, but...
So I think my answer to that question is, and I want to make sure that I want to pay the right attention to what it is that you're asking. And I need to come back and clarify something that I heard you say earlier, Ray, and I've seen a couple of people talk about it, like Mac Wilkerson mentioned it specifically in the Roundtable chat room over there, and that is that Google keeps changing its mind. Google does not keep changing its mind. It doesn't. Look at the guidelines that Google provides, and Google, by the way, has provided very clear guidelines. Yeah, they're a little more technical than you want them to be, but nonetheless, Google has provided clear guidelines on what it takes to have their system recognize your podcast. Just follow them. And that was my advice to Todd for the new media show. Todd's rel alternate links, he has a bunch, a whole bunch in there. And the guidelines clearly say, just one, please. Just one. So I can't promise that if he just does one, suddenly it's going to reallocate his listings away from Apple Podcast into the new media show. But I can tell you that he is currently not following Google's guidelines. So as long as you choose to not follow Google's guidelines, you should expect unpredictable results. But I will say, here's the silver lining on that. He wants his podcast episodes listened to. They're there. They may not be in the exact spot that he wants them to be.
Yeah.
But they're there.
And he says that too.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, the message is he doesn't care where people listen as long as they listen, right? That's what he says.
Right.
So the Podcaster Studio shows up with the play buttons, and it's because it's my website shows up first. There are no play buttons in that listing. The play buttons come in the Apple listing.
Mm-hmm,
and there's no way I'm going to, in theory, I'm not going to beat Apple, right? They have all the authority, right? Why would I
search for mine? Search for podcast pontifications.
So you are, I want to see what that looks like. But
I can guarantee you my domain authority on podcast pontifications, a website that consists of one page. I don't even have my episode details on that page. It has a much lower domain authority.
Okay, so this is nice. Okay, you are showing, so Google is giving you the play. So it's not doing it for Apple Podcast the way it's doing on my show. It's giving it for your website. Okay, what's the difference?
I think it's two. One, I have only one. I followed all of Google's guidelines. I know exactly what they say, and I've done that. That's
do most people, does that require having your own website? What if people don't have their own website?
Well, I mean, Google's guidelines are for webmasters. I mean, it's for your website. Right. So if you don't have one.
But if you just had the domain, there's nothing I can do. Like I own the URL, but it points to something. Like
then that would not be following Google's guidelines. Right. So it's automatically non-sequitur. So that's number one. Number two is, while my domain doesn't outrank Google, Podcast Pontifications hasn't been around for forever. And in fact, I've only put it up on Apple Podcasts probably in October of last year is when I
You're
finally. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Between you and who else?
bag.
Gary Leland
Okay,
and a
all
handful
right,
of other people. We're saying, hey, this should be a podcast, don't you think? So, but my podcast was the podcastpontifications.com was around for longer, so it has longevity. So when you start thinking about how Google ranks things, it could be that for that particular reference point, there's more authority just for that phrase that goes to. I'm just going to there's less for Apple for me because it's a newer show. And Podcasters Roundtable has been around for how long? Long time. New Media Show around for a really, really long time. Now I know, if Todd's listening, he's going to say, yeah, but come on, Evo, newmediashow.com. I am the ownyourown.com guy. That's built into my DNA. I get it. But I think at some point in time, what may happen is maybe Apple Podcast eventually starts to outrank Podcast Pontifications and it flips. Although I don't think that's the case. I think Google's going to continue to tweak this and it'll stay that way.
Todd will have had his domain as long as he's had it in Apple Podcast.
If not even longer. Yeah,
it's equal,
exactly.
Right.
Right.
So
right.
What's nice to me about seeing this for your webs is that it's possible. Like this isn't like necessarily biased towards Google Podcasts or Apple Podcast. I mean, it's right there for you. Yeah. Whatever making that happen.
Right.
It's right there.
Ray, are you saying that if you type in Podcasters Roundtable, you don't come up number one?
The website, yes, but I don't get any play buttons even for Apple Pod. Do you?
Got it.
You get no play.
I get the top page as you. I got a bunch of YouTube videos.
YouTube. It still likes and that's
no
a Google
buttons.
priority, right?
Yeah.
So maybe Google with the push towards podcasts will say, hey, let's surface the.
I don't know this is Google priority as much as it's actually that's where all of your traffic has been built. That's what your history says. Podcasters Roundtable is a video thing.
Well,
the videos.
It's not. I mean, it's co-equal, right? Like it's been a podcast as long as it's been a video. So
right.
In the podcast, in theory, obviously they're not tied into Apple numbers. Gets more listens than the video gets views.
Google doesn't know anything about that,
right?
Google knows what people click on, and people click on your links to your videos a lot. So why would Google stop giving people things that they click on?
Well, they couldn't click on the audio before the audio was. I mean,
Right. But still, that's the reality that you live in. You don't know. And Google probably is 1 out of 1,000 times somebody searches for Podcasters Roundtable podcast.
Give them
I can't imagine that happens like 1,000 times a day, but hey, who knows? Maybe it actually does. A few people are probably getting those results, or that's the idea. Google does that. They will occasionally surface something. Let's try it here. That's why when you look at your Google Webmasters or Google Search Console, you see really, really weird things on how your ranking has gone up and down throughout the day of an individual page, just because Google's testing all the time. And eventually, as if more people do click and start listening to the audio and show Google there's a clear preference for listening to those audio episodes as opposed to the video episodes, then your audio episodes will outrank them, but not until that time.
And I still don't think that, it's all sort of moot because I don't think having a play button under Podcasters Roundtable would do anything to drive more listeners. Nothing, right? Like
I don't think so either.
There needs to be, I mean, honestly, I think this round, I've highly enjoyed it. I think there's a ton of value we've gotten out of this conversation. It's been kind of all over the place. It doesn't fit the title exactly because we went down a long rabbit hole about, I don't know, something else. It wasn't search, but it would have to be very specific to the episode. I mean, if this round landed for a topic that someone was asking a question about, but even then it's more about, I just don't know if questions is going to be what it's looking for. Everyone wants to see the play button, but does it really matter? The thing sort of related to this, Apple recently restructured how they appear on the web, how your show appears on the web.
Yeah.
Right. So you get an Apple landing page in like Google in a browser search that's very nice. It's got a playable player, so someone doesn't have to go to Apple; they just play it right there on the web.
Yep.
But looks great. So what? Like, is this the thing? Are you promoting that? Like, what value does that have for us? It looks great. It functions better. Does it play value? Does it have value to your podcast? I'm glad to see it. But it's not the link I'm going to be giving people. So where's the value? Having play buttons.
The value is for people that go listen to me on, I don't know, whatever, schoolofpodcasting.com/iTunes. And I forget that I'm ignoring 80% of the people that have an Android phone. They can now go to that page and at least listen. Where
Right.
before it was like, well, thanks for nothing. That does
Right.
nothing for me. So
It
I
doesn't
guess
exclude people, but you're not. I mean, you're just screwing up by promoting Apple.
yes, yeah, you're making a huge mistake by ignoring the 80% of people that have an Android phone.
But anyways, Evo, what did you think of these new pages? Like, is this cool?
I think they're great because it finally, for the first time in 13 years, that as Dave said, suddenly a link to Apple is useful for anyone on any device because those links exist. So it's not a matter of whether I get value out of it or not. The reality is that someone at some point in time is going to share a link to my show on Apple with someone else who may not have an Apple device.
Well, your show and my results is third on that list. Apple Podcasts, when you're searching for podcasts, ranks high almost all the time.
Right.
And now when I go to that page, if I'm just doing a search, it's playable, right? I don't have to jump off, right?
That's the benefit right there.
That's nice because your show probably ranks your show probably ranks better in Apple than it does maybe for your own website for a lot of things.
That's
for
possible,
a lot of people,
right? There's a lot of domain authority built up there, sure.
I never realized this was back. Maybe it's never went away. At the bottom of that page, the good old listeners also subscribe to.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Yeah. They've been making some changes. Yeah. They changed it now. No longer
there.
iTunes. It's Apple Podcasts now. So yeah, all sorts of
It's been there because it's my favorite. It's the thing I've always said has drove more podcast discovery than anything else. And it's literally like one of the first things that came along for podcast discovery. And so I wish this wasn't an app. Like, we always talk about discovery and talk about apps. This needs to surface in apps because, and I'm biased by the way that I consumed. And early on when I found a podcast, and that one podcast showed me that there were 5 other podcasts that people liked on the same topic, I subscribed to them all. Did I stick with them?
Yeah.
No, not all of them, but it worked so well, at least in my case. I want to see that in an app. There is very limited real estate. Do we think that these listings, because they have these great domain authority, right? This part, you're talking about, Evo, writing different show notes for what pops up in your Apple, like your description, whatever they're surfacing. First of all, what are they surfacing on this page? I'm looking at the Apple Podcast preview page on the web for podcast pontifications. I see like maybe 140 characters.
Yeah, they're doing subtitle. That's it.
Subtitle.
iTunes summary / subtitle.
Not subtitle because they don't use subtitle for anything.
Then it's iTunes summary. It's
iTunes summary
for that. Yeah, so they're not pulling the description, which they should. They're not pulling the content encoded, which they should. Because that text right there you see on mine is I do the same thing for the subtitle as well as the iTunes summary because they're identical usage.
Do we think this new page and format this will help us all in search at all?
I think it's going to help Apple in search, which in turn helps us because if somebody does find this, because I mean, I'm on the one right now for the one I did today, which was called "The Future of Podcasting Might Be Stealing from Instagram Stories." So if that outranks, if somebody comes along and searches for podcasting Instagram stories, let's just say that's what they wanted to search on. I don't think of my shows in search format, but nonetheless, if they did that and they got this episode served up high because Apple Podcasts, podcast.apple.com has a very high domain authority, then they are listening to my content. That helps me. Did they go to my website to listen? No, they didn't. And I do not care. I just want them to listen.
I hate to make this an example because it's a serial, but I was like, you know what? Here's a podcast that a lot of people will have heard of.
Yeah.
Not know where the heck they listen. They don't know anything about it. They're just going to go to Google and type in one word, serial, right? What does that bring up? So it brings up their domain and the play buttons, right? So it doesn't even surface the Apple stuff at all. Oh, no, I lied. It is actually, it's like the 4th down there.
Yeah, I see it down there. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just thinking that this is probably a way when a podcast catches pop fever that way, right? Mm-hmm. That could be a case where people are just searching, they're not going to catch Podcasters Roundtable like that most people are not searching for, but they may have heard it outside. They may have Facebook community. Maybe someone didn't link to it. They just said, check out Podcasters Roundtable. So they go to Google, they put in Podcasters Roundtable and, being found for your own name. This also, okay, let's think about search. I typed in cereal. I spelt it right. I didn't get Cheerios, right? Does this affect anything when we're thinking about naming our podcasts?
maybe my content on it. Don't worry about branded searches. Branded searches will sort themselves out.
Hey, what do you mean? What do you mean?
What searching for podcasters roundtable? They're not
Right.
going to have trouble finding that. I mean, it's really
Right.
Dave talked about how do this podcast rodeo show is a different situation. Okay, sure, I get some of that, but I don't worry too much about the play here. Isn't did they find your podcast? I think the play here in Google is, are your episodes being surfaced to people? That's the more important play.
And we didn't get to the fact that Google is transcribing behind the scenes episodes. And I mean, we think they're going to surface episodic content based on what's inside that content, based on transcripts that they're making.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
They're absolutely doing that. Right. Yeah. And whether or not, so yeah, that begs the question. So do you need to follow Evo's advice previously when he said, write 1,000 words? Look, if Google's just going to churn through the audio,
which we've been waiting for
and figure out what you said, and maybe not more importantly, but also when it's answering a question, just send you right there to 15 minutes and 37 seconds into the audio when you gave that exact answer. Isn't that better? Should we just wait for Google to do that?
Show notes are dead. Hey,
yeah.
Here's the thing. They don't do it for YouTube, and they could. They automatically transcribe. They show you video, but they don't put you right at the answer.
And that's I think why we're not seeing that happen right away. I think they've got a lot more. There's an ability to do that because they can simply say, okay, the answer is 11 minutes and 13 seconds. So let's give them a 10-second pad to go into that. Yeah. And then do a nice fade in and all that stuff, but they're not doing it. And they must not be doing it for a reason. And I think it's a whole lot easier for them to do that on content that they host as opposed to pulling it from an MP3 file that's living on, Libsyns or Blueberries or Whooshkas or whoever's server. That's got to be harder.
Yeah. Oh man, I've had a good time. You can see it. Just questions keep coming to mind. This has been a blast. We're definitely we're over time, as they'd say, but that doesn't exist in podcasting. Again, there is no clock. I hate
exists on mine.
We're out of time. It does, right? Why?
Right, because my videos can't be longer than 10 minutes. They won't go to LinkedIn.
Ah, see, you're catering to a platform, which is interesting.
Yeah, and also it gets me on the point faster. I don't know if you know this, but I tend to ramble.
Well, that's why I bring you back on the show. You got to fill dead air. Just bring it on. All right. Well, that's awesome. Hey, hopefully, I mean, if you're still listening or watching, you enjoyed it. So thanks. podcastersroundtable.com/guest will actually get you to a list where you can sign up to be on a round where we bring on more guests. Today's short notice, short staffed, but the checks are in the mail. Dave Jackson, what do I search on Google to find your podcast?
Yes. Search for School of Podcasting, and hopefully I will turn up. I would hope so.
Which is funny because you could just put .com on that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that's it. You could just go right there, schoolofpodcasting.com, skip the Google, and you'll go right to me.
Skip the Google. I have that on a t-shirt.
I typed School of P, and normally it just auto fills it, but then it just stopped and just took my search result, and I got all these schools near B, and I'm thinking, how many of these schools actually teach you how to pee? But luckily, none of them actually do. So I just checked, Dave. Good news. School of Podcasting shows up several times. You have it showing up as schoolofpodcasting.com, and also the the School of Podcasting. Is that you? Are you the School of Podcasting?
The School of Podcasting is actually the School of Podcasting. School of Podcasting is just the podcast.
So do you own both of those domains? Is my question.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Right. Okay,
the School of Podcasting is my Thinkific site.
Is your what site?
My Thinkific. It's my actual membership site.
Thinkific.
Thinkific is the
that's
part
the
of the
software. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I've never heard that before. So now I understand. Awesome.
Do you tell people to search for your show in podcast apps or something? You just deliver the CTA is the go to the domain.
Yeah. I don't tell them what to
wherever
do.
fine podcasts are served.
No, I don't do any of that. I don't.
He sends them to his website.
I say, look, there should be. I've done marketing for too damn long. One call to action, the things that you do. So so email me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro, or you can visit my website where you see all the list of the services I offer my clients at podcastlaunch.pro. Yeah, that's that. I don't tell anybody to do any searching. Yeah, so tell them who I am. Go to the site. Give me your email, or email me, or just go to the website. That's it. Simple.
Awesome. Well, podcast pontifications. I don't know if that's what you delivered, but that's where you want to find Evo. You should be checking out another podcast about podcasting that's actually a podcast now.
Yeah, finally, we're papped. We're papped up.
I still consume via video, but I live in both worlds, so
Whatever, man. You can consume a video. You can listen to me in the shower.
it's very cherry picked though. Like that is the problem when you don't subscribe, right? Like
Right.
I don't know if the problem, but I do cherry pick. But we were talking earlier about subscription versus sort of cherry picking, and I think interview shows, the biggest ones that I don't know if I say suffer from it, is that I'm going to cherry pick a name. WTF, is it in my podcatcher? Sure. When's the last time I listened to it? I couldn't tell you. It has to, a name has to surface where I'm like, yes, I want to hear from Macaulay Culkin. Like, what's he doing?
Now, there's a good reason. I mean, why doesn't, when I type in interview with Dave Jackson, which you've only been interviewed,
a million
digit times,
that you should surface.
That we're not getting podcast episodes. And we're getting, well, that's not true. We probably are getting podcast episodes, but we're getting standard SERP results. Yeah. We're not getting the.
And that's just because it's probably early days, right?
New.
Because
it's new.
That does seem really catered. That's a great category for surfacing an interview. I mean, an audio interview.
Right. Come on, Zach.
Come on, Zach.
Zach RW, where are you, man? Get on the
Zach.
shtick.
The word Zach is like he's the Alexa to the Google podcast of Echo.
Yeah.
We just referred to generic Zach.
He's like Cher. There's only one Zach. I'm sorry, Zalika, the guy from the Hangover movies. You've been replaced.
Oh, Galifianakis. Between two ferns.
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Even better.
Hey, I thought we ended the show a minute ago. Did we not end this episode? And we kept going. We're so close.
Is this the post show? And so
we forgot to end it.
I told you, if people are still listening, they're into it, man.
See, this is fine. I'm okay with this.
Banter, right?
Keep the trailer.
Spaghetti banter has not been moved to the end.
For behind the scenes, when I gave you podcastersroundtable.com/guest, you want to sign up because the best part of this show is the part you don't see. So when we shut off the recording, when I hit stop broadcast and Google says we've been terminated, very ominous, by the way, Google, I know what you're doing. We talk for like an hour longer. And like, I always want to record those, make those the Patreon, and then deliver that. But then what would happen is we would do that. We'd stop that. And I'd say, okay, we're off that. And we do another hour. Because the point is, until the recording really stops, we don't get to hear the best of the best stuff. So sign up. That's a big, long, lengthy call to action to sign up for podcastersroundtable.com/guest, or just subscribe, because you won't hear that stuff. So it makes no point. Guest, sign up. We are going to end it. I'm going to end it. Thank you, everyone. Wave goodbye. I almost forgot that part. We're out of here.